Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the November 16th, 2021 meeting of the City of South Pasadena Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission to order. Let's start with the roll. Liana, would you please?
Chair Abelson,
Here?
Commissioner Dunlap,
Here.
Commissioner Fisher,
Here.
Commissioner Hughes, here, and Commissioner Liu.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Liana. Thank you, everyone. And Councilmember Primuth is not here yet, but hopefully he'll be able to join us. I'd also like to recognize staff with us tonight, Acting Public Works Director Ted Gerber, Tatovic, and I apologize if I forgot your last name. Thanks you, what Liana just said. Liana DeWitt, thank you all. Next up, the Pledge of Allegiance, Commissioner Hughes, please.
Yes, everyone will please stand, face the flag, hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Next up, our first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any public comments? I see none for the general public comments, so we'll open and then close public comment, and we'll move to item 2, which would be the minutes of our last meeting on October 19th, 2021. And we have the draft minutes, which already incorporate, I think, Commissioner Hughes and my revisions, which is great. And then I think Commissioner Fisher had a couple that were circulated. I don't know if anybody had a chance to see those. Maybe you can share them with us.
Yes, I had 2 comments, just strictly editorial. The first one would be on commission-led discussion item number 4, the second sentence. And I just really changed a couple words, but the first part of the sentence would read, one suggestion for traffic entering the Holy Family parking lot, and then the rest is okay. One suggestion for traffic entering the Holy Family parking lot.
Okay.
And then my next editorial comment was on Commissioner Communications item number 8. First sentence. Commissioner Fisher discussed an issue, no D at the end, an issue, raised by Commissioner Hughes earlier in the year. And then the rest is okay. Commissioner Fisher discussed an issue raised by Commissioner Hughes earlier in the year regarding the improvements to address the traffic delays, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Anything else?
Those were my only 2.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any corrections, comments? I hear and see none.
I would so move approval of the minutes as amended with all the suggestions.
Okay, great. So motion to approve is amended by Commissioner Hughes. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Fisher seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. Minutes as amended approved 5-0. Thank you. Thank you all. All right. Item number 3, prioritization of Measure M projects. And I know we have a public comment, so maybe we'll start with the staff report and then we'll go from there. Welcome, Mr. Gerber.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Wilson, and good evening, commissioners. First off, I'd like to apologize for the late staff report issued a few hours ago. We have a busy week ahead of us. This is one of 2 commission meetings in addition to a council meeting. And as you know, we're a bit short-staffed, so we won't make a habit of releasing documents that late, so appreciate your patience. Unfortunately, this is an issue that we've seen before, and so hopefully there's some familiarity with the commission and we can work through any questions you have tonight. So the staff is recommending that the commission provide a prioritization of the Measure M project list to be submitted to the Arroyo Verdugo Communities Joint Power Authorities, which I'll refer to as the JPA. Many of us are already familiar with Measure M, a sales tax-driven grant program administered by Metro, in which South Pasadena has allocated regional funds that it can expend by applying, by submitting that list of projects to the Joint Power Authority. There is an existing list of Measure M projects, and thank you, Commissioner Fisher, for adding on that additional document to further explain that list of Measure M projects for tonight. So the staff's plan for this list of projects is to bring it before City Council in mid-December for their approval, and then submit it to the AVC Technical Advisory Committee when they meet in January next. With the current funding limitation, the 7-year cycle of funding for $1.7 million, there's a concern that that $1.7 million may not be sufficient funding to cover all of the items in the project list. Now, that does not to say that all those projects won't be implemented, especially as the city is going through its capital improvement program process. We're coming up on our mid-year budget adjustment and then heading into planning for fiscal year 22-23 expenditures. Our staff is looking into how to fund the array of transportation projects being brought for both the Measure M list and other transportation projects. However, we feel it's important that in order for the commission to, the commission's intent to be captured through the process with the JPA, that there is a prioritization of these projects so that the ones that are higher prioritized, that funding can go to those first. And so our request of you is very straightforward this evening. It's to take a look at the 7 projects on the second page of the staff report and consider a prioritization that staff can communicate to City Council when we bring this forward on December 15th. That's our planned date to bring Measure M projects. And then also communicate that as we pass this on to the TAC, so that when and if these projects can be funded with these sub-regional funds from Measure M, staff can identify which projects to start with first and make sure that funding is directed appropriately in that towards those projects. So happy to answer any questions you may have. And I'll also add that we have other staff liaisons, Tatovic and Liana, here tonight. So both this item and our next staff liaison items, we're all ready to assist you and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher.
Yeah, I have a question. We have the 7 projects listed here. Are you suggesting that the commission should say which one is number 1, 2, 3, or are we just submitting these as a group?
We are suggesting that they be prioritized. We're open to your suggestions of whether they should be numbered 1 through 7, or perhaps maybe grouped as a higher priority versus lower priority, whatever the commission's comfortable in doing. But our recommendation is that when it comes down to deciding how the $1.7 million in Measure M funding is distributed among the projects, we feel it's important to have the commission's direction in where that funding should go first.
Okay, given that, does the acting public works director have a recommendation on which the sequence of the prioritization?
Well, I do understand that as far as the commission's former discussion and action on this item, the last two projects on the list, 6 and 7, were already identified as projects that may, if there's enough funding, those might be able to move forward. If I were to make a recommendation, I don't have anyone specific based on any knowledge I have of any of these specific issues, but as a general comment, I'd say that the larger scale projects of the few might be better to prioritize, whereas we might be able to find smaller amounts of funding for the smaller projects. For example, for rectangular rapid flashing beacon installation, we have a number of locations. It may be possible to find additional funding for one or more of those locations as separate items versus, extra, not funding other than Measure M for some of your larger projects. And I would also consider that when I mention something as a larger project, some of these require coordination with other entities, other cities, which may require more time and more investment in that process. And so that's to be considered too. So if that helps at all, those are my comments on your prioritization.
Thank you. And just one clarification, just before the meeting, I asked Leona to send out the original list that we had approved and prepared. And I asked it to be sent out only as an informational item. And I can appreciate that the descriptions you have here in 1 or 2 sentences are a simplification of the detail here. And I recognize that maybe the detail is a little bit too thick for elected officials, but I think it serves a value to have your staff and the commissioners to retain this as an informational document to identify the rationale for the project and the options considered and the reasons therefore, just as a backup item.
Yeah, and as staff, we very much appreciate that you made that addition. In fact, it was very considerate of you. Thank you very much. Our aim was just to summarize the projects as there has been, a long discussion of these projects over time. But thank you very much for adding that information, because as far as the decision-making for prioritization, it is important to understand that history and how those came about.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Director. A couple questions. One, is there, the estimates that were kind of put there, knowing that supply chain situations exist and we've got escalating inflation. So as you talk about some of the higher price items, do you see a projected inflation rate that we might need to have to consider as we look at these in lieu of the timing and being able to execute? And I was going to also bring up the point that if we had to prioritize, that maybe if the negotiation would be difficult for the San Marino interface and or the Pasadena, that might be a factor. But I would think that if we were looking at, to me, the Pasadena, the Columbia is more of a pinch point because it feeds into our problems with Fremont and other things that we've heard about for many, many years. The other question would be to say, is there a way that we could look at this list and any concerns we have with funding in lieu of the infrastructure bill that just got passed? As I understand the process, that individual cities will be able to go and make recommendations, applications, et cetera. And so much of that funding, as I looked at and went through with connections I have through legislative, that a lot of the cities, particularly ones like ours, have a really good chance of getting funding because they've seen small cities as never having the budget to do a lot of the major transportation infrastructure things that are needed. So if we can put sort of a pin in it and say, make sure that we work and try to get funding so that we can do this, but not just this, but things we've been envisioning with Meridian, things we've been envisioning with Fremont, things we've been envisioning with Fair Oaks, and how important that is from not just us, but from a regional standpoint, And we have a very good argument to make to be able to get funding. So I would just kind of earmark that as something important that we look at and use this opportunity to make sure that we try to capture as many funds as possible.
Yes, thank you for that. So with regard to prioritization, I do agree. It is important. Obviously, if there's a project such as the Columbia, Pasadena, Fremont project, which I'll add, as many of you know, we have him contacted from the city of South Pasadena to discuss that project. And we're following up with their Department of Transportation to see that the commissioner's recommendation regarding that parking and also the input from the residents in that area is factored into how that is configured. And again, as you said, as that is a pinch point, may deserve consideration as a higher prioritization, especially given that the project's already underway and we're already being contacted by the city of the city of Pasadena to discuss that. So I agree there. With regard to additional funding, yes, it is our opinion that the city will be able to take advantage of multiple funding sources. Recent council discussions beyond the infrastructure bill have discussed ARPA funding and also cell tower revenue funding. I will say that if you tuned into our special meeting on the CIP program last week, you see there are many, many priorities for the city. A lot of those are identified in the strategic plan process, which we'll touch on that later tonight with some of our items. So I will say that as far as transportation projects are concerned, I don't know where that funding will go. It'll be a council decision, and certainly the commissions will have input, but I imagine that a lot of that will go to some of the street repair and other transportation avenue repair that may have been lacking in the city to bring some of those conditions up to a higher standard. But with that said, our staff is committed to attempting to find the funding necessary in order to complete all the projects being put forth by the commission. And we don't have cost estimates for that. To your comment about inflation, obviously that is a key factor. We were looking at inflation rates in bringing forward 2017 costs for other projects that we were looking at 2017, and we understand it to be like an 11 or 12% increase, not considering some of the increased costs for supply chain issues. So yeah, there's very many things to consider here. And trying to remember the last issue we were talking about.
Well, the one thing to think about, I know obviously Councilmember Primus is probably obviously aware that the infrastructure funding is a number of buckets.
Mhm.
So not only can we apply from the transportation earmarked funds, but there's funds available for water and or sewer for cities for infrastructure. So that's, I mean, we can look at all of our needs as you look at the capital projects plan and kind of seeing, and we can earmark and plan. We're going to go after these dollars here and these dollars here and these dollars here. And the other thing is supposedly cities can partner. So the opportunity for us to partner with Alhambra, San Marino, Pasadena, particularly from a corridor standpoint, we can go together and be able to ask for funds from a regional standpoint and probably have a really good chance of actually maximizing dollars. So
Yes, certainly. And I'll add that conversation with a member of the AVC Tech earlier today led me to understand that that may be the approach that the TAC is taking too. Whereas the project distribution we're talking about now and what's been done recently with Measure M is our cities taking their funds and applying them to specific projects, either within their city or, as we're discussing tonight, with a bordering city to address traffic concerns. But there may be consideration at the TAC in January to start looking at applying future funding to large regional projects in that way. So that would be helpful in identifying the projects. And then, of course, if there can be additional regional funding from, say, the infrastructure bill, that would certainly supercharge, the ability to execute some of those projects.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any other questions for staff before we go to public comments? Okay, seeing none. Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, I had just one more, and I'm not sure when I was going to. Just on the description. of what's happening. It says that provide a second southbound lane by modifying the center. I know that when we developed our description, we looked at that option very carefully. And instead, our description said by relocating the west curb line, that second lane. Rationale being is that if you modify the center median and narrow it by whatever 4 to 6 feet, it wouldn't be wide enough to shadow out the left turn lane onto the inbound Arroyo Seco Parkway, but also it would make the median so narrow that you wouldn't have room for trees in the middle. I mean, you could physically put in a tree, but you need a certain shy distance to a fixed object. And that would not meet the normal criteria. You'd have to take out the water lines. So when we looked at the parkway on the west side, it varies in width, but in portions it's fairly wide with very little pedestrian traffic there, because I'll walk it on my morning walks and I see what's there. So we'd indicated that it would, if everyone's okay, then it would be to installation of a second southbound lane on the west side by relocating the west curb line to provide the additional travel width. So if no one objects to that, I would like the description to be to report.
That's okay with me. Just as a point of clarification, my thought is, or suggestion was going to be when we got to discussion, that whatever order we all settle on, that the project descriptions that are submitted to the council are the ones that we approved in August. And then if staff wants to provide, like, as you're describing, a summary in their staff report to council, fine. And if staff wants to run that by John and or me, since we're the ones that came up with this, at least, mostly John, that would be fine. But I unless you disagree, that the detailed list should be the one that goes to council, because that's the one we approved. And that's the one that has all the information in it.
That's fine, whatever list we submit, I just wanted them to be consistent.
Right. So maybe if we could just make sure that the summary is at least passed by John, before you submit the staff report to council for the December 15th meeting.
Of course, yeah,
Does
that's
that make sense?
understood. Yeah, and to be honest, I think this is probably just an oversight on our part
Sure.
with a mix up between the project descriptions that have
Yeah.
changed over time. But we'll certainly make sure that the city council report includes that. And we'll discuss it later this evening, but we maybe even have an opportunity again to meet, to discuss this before the
Thinking
15th.
Same thing.
Yes. But certainly we'll run it by you to make sure that it meets your expectations.
Oh, Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you, Chair. Do any of these projects require any sort of environmental documentation? Whether that be CEQA, like CEQA documentation, and also kind of looking through the cost estimates that the commission came up with, are there any that you feel are way off, like either way too high or way too low? I understand that this is a prioritization, and the 1.7 million can't cover everything. However, if any of these projects is well over $1 million, I'd hate to just have one Measure M project throughout the city.
It's a very good question. In fact, that's the motivation to bring the item for you tonight is in the event that the cost estimates are higher, and then we don't want to give an impression that all projects will be completed for the 1.7 million. I will say that part of this process is to determine what those extra costs would be. We do understand that there will be feasibility studies necessary for some of the projects. And so with that, that may require an environmental assessment. I think it depends on how comprehensive or how drastic the changes are that we're planning on make. So I don't have an answer for you in terms of like number. There was a staff discussion about how much some of these projects were cost. And I'll say that the final number from a staff perspective was in the millions, but I don't think it's appropriate to commit to those types of costs so early on without having those reviewed by a consultant who would look into the detail of each type of project. So I don't know if that's helpful answer for you or not.
Yeah, somewhat. I was
Okay.
just like looking at a new traffic signal. I mean, I can say with my experience, you know, $400,000 is pretty much enough for a traffic signal. But I just wondered, in your expertise, like kind of looking through the list, did you feel that these cost estimates were pretty accurate or were any way off?
Well, let me pull out some notes here, see if I can answer your question a little bit better. I think as far as like we were discuss a variance between what the commission's recommending and what the staff expect the expenditures to be, there's probably not that much, like you said, on a project like a traffic signal or say like the Gravalia Street and Fair Oaks Avenue increasing a turn radius or even you know, the installation of the RRFBs at any singular location, where there's a large variance in the staff's opinion would be, as I mentioned earlier, the project, the Garfield Avenue Monterey Road traffic signal, where there's a large amount of interaction with San Marino. There was a comment about the Orange Grove modifications that Commissioner Fisher had brought up about making those types of adjustments. So there are some higher target values here. What we considered doing was getting consultant estimates for the installation of projects, but that would also require us delaying the submission to
understand.
Measure M.
But
And so
thank-
this was sort of a balanced approach,
Thank you.
of course.
Okay, and we'll have discussion later, but any other questions for Mr. Gerber before we go to public comment? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and open public comment?
Tucker Nelson.
Welcome.
Welcome. Is this on?
I don't think. See the red light?
The light is on. Okay, there we go.
All right, good evening.
Good evening. I'm sure to no one's surprise, I'm going to talk about the Gravalia right turn northward on Fair Oaks. While this is a personally annoying to me and aggravating to many drivers, collisions would happen at slow speed at that location. So damage would be occurred to vehicles and it would probably be minor damage, somewhat minor damage. So I am suggesting that you put this farther down on your priority list and move higher up anything where there is any possibility of injury to people. And I realize at some point we may have enough money and manpower to do all of them, but something has to be done first. So that is my suggestion on that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, any other public comments? Seeing none. All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment then. Okay, discussion. Does anybody want to, Commissioner Liu?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to note that from rereading I'll wait for that. Okay, great. In rereading the project descriptions, I'm wondering if we should package project descriptions for Columbia Street and Orange Grove Avenue together, since they are very much related and go hand in hand. I just want to note that if whatever priority list we come up with, I think it would be wise to keep them relatively similar, or right next to each other. I'd be worried if we prioritize one near the top of the list and one near the bottom, as one kind of feeds into the other. And I just also want to echo that the public comment from Tucker was very insightful, and I think really prudent. And I would support moving up the RRFB project, even if it is 4 different intersections of kind of smaller projects as a package, possibly over Gravalia, just because of the safety concerns that it would address. That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. I have lots to say, but I'll go last.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Hughes.
one quick question, this might also include Ted, but having experienced how many years it took the signal to get put in on Monterey and Orange Grove, I'm wondering, if the signal again should be maybe further down on the list, because I'm not sure if that was an unusual experience, but that took multiple years. So if we would have the same experience, particularly if we have to interface with San Marino on it, maybe that could go down more towards the bottom of the list.
So
Just a thought.
thank you. So I was going to go last, but I'm just going to. So a couple notes about that. I think our experience with Orange Grove and Monterey was, to put it politely, unique. And amongst other things, I think its proximity to the Gold Line crossing was a bit of a challenge. Certainly delayed things. I mean, there were other reasons too, and then the pandemic sort of was the final the final punch there, but it finally got in. So I think there might be some differences between the two, and I think there, other signals have been put in the city in less time, so hopefully it was just an outlier. That's one of the original projects that was on the Measure M list from the beginning, and I think we've already discussed all the reasons behind it, but I think it's a significant location for the city. As you talk about pinch points, right? There's a lot of cross traffic. It's certainly at peak hours of the day, and there's a lot of backup at certain hours of the day because of that. So just a reaction. That's all. Commissioner Fisher, did you want to say anything at this point? Not
Well, I
okay.
have several things to say.
Okay.
I'd like you to.
All right, I'll finish. Thank you. So looking at the list, I very much appreciate Tucker's comments and Commissioner Liu's comments, and I think two and three have a lot of connections, physically and otherwise. 2 being the Columbia Street proposals, and 3 being the Orange Grove proposal. And we talk about, rightly so, the issue with injury, and we've noted just within the past 6-8 months, there have been multiple accidents on Orange Grove, south of Columbia, pretty much right where the 2 lanes dramatically and drastically merge into one. So I think dealing with Orange Grove and creating a safer environment for drivers, I think should be a priority. So a note on that. And Gravalia and Fair Oaks. So that's something that's been near and dear to the hearts of a number of us for quite some time. And it really has 2 major components. One is correcting the corner so that the turning movements, that I guess it's the northeast corner, so that the turn movements are safer. And then also better alignment of the lane lines, and trying to work with Caltrans on reducing one of the through lanes, because when you come off the freeway at Fair Oaks northbound 110, there's quite a jog if you're going straight, and the two lanes continue onto Revelia on the other side of Fair Oaks. It's quite dramatic and not the safest. And removing one of the through lanes would be a great improvement. But I'm wondering, one, Tucker makes a good point. Two, we have Measure R, right? And Measure R, which is quite an impressive sum of money. And the focus of it is the interchange. So I'm wondering if we should think about this correction as part of the Measure R projects. The downside to that is the Measure R projects, and whether it's addition of the loop or the new loop ramp or whatever ends up happening, that's not tomorrow. And it would be fantastic if we could do something to improve the flow of traffic there and make it safer. And not only for cars, but also pedestrians who have to cross there and are waiting to cross there. So I'm a little betwixt and between on the Grevillea one. On the RRFBs, so the reserve projects, I think, are reserve, and I think those should stay at the bottom where they are for the reasons we've already discussed that put them there. For the RFBs, it seems like there are other sources of money that can be used to fund these types of things, and I'm thinking that they should be further down on the list. Maybe we pick one if we want that's particularly significant, or we think maybe is more of a safety improvement than the others, or maybe there's a higher demand. I know I hear quite a bit about Meridian and Bank, which is behind the high school stadium stands, and it's a high volume crossing for students. So that may be something to think about. So to me, either all of the RFBs stay sort of basically where they are on the list, which is towards the bottom, or maybe we pick one and elevate that over the others. But I think, so bottom line, and then I'll pass the torch. I think Garfield and Monterey is critical and important, and it's a part of the city where we haven't done anything. So it would be nice to address the issue. And the challenge here is whether it's one or it's two or it's three, they all involve reaching out and cooperating with neighboring cities, right? The Garfield and Monterey requires, including San Marino in the conversation. I think if we're providing the funding, hopefully it won't be a huge challenge. And then with 2 and 3, again, well, 3 is ours. 3 is within the city of South Pasadena, but 2 is shared, and that's Columbia, between Orange Grove and Columbia Place, which is just west of Fair Oaks. And that street is shared, if not mostly Pasadena. But what we saw recently and what Mr. Gerber referred to a few minutes ago was that Pasadena is already looking at least at some initial striping adjustments to Columbia at Pasadena. So they seem to be receptive or interested in making some safety improvements there. So hopefully that's an opportunity to cooperate. So hopefully the cooperation issue isn't a huge challenge to overcome, or a reason why we should put something towards the bottom. So from my perspective, I think number 1's in the right place. The traffic signal at Monterey and Garfield. Maybe, I agree with Commissioner Liu that 2 and 3 are sort of related, maybe can be viewed together. I think if I was to choose which one, they're close, but I probably would pick 3 over 2, which is the restoring the southbound second lane on Orange Grove, because of the fact that there have been so many accidents. And then 2, if we're going to keep it separate, and then maybe after that, Grevillea and Fair Oaks, and then Meridian Bank, and then the rest of the RRFBs. And then the only other comment, and then I promise I will finish. I'm wondering, Grevillea and Fair Oaks, I'm wondering is it really $200,000 to do what it is we're talking about? And is there a way to address the safety issue with the right turn movement at that intersection without doing all of this? I mean, I'm the last one that wants to revisit projects we've already recommended for Measure M. But I just wanted to throw it out there that maybe if we put Revere and Fair Oaks towards the bottom of the list, we either think of it as part of a Measure R situation, or we see if there are other operational type funds that we can use to make some temporary improvements at the intersection to make it safer. Anyway, that's it for now. Commissioner Fisher.
On the detailed list for the new signal at Garfield and Monterey, we still have to do the traffic study. We still have to show that a warrant or a guideline is met for traffic signal control. And I have to believe that if we were to provide that information, that the city of San Marino would not be in a position to say, sorry, we're not interested, because then that puts them in a tort liability risk situation. We were told by the former Director of Public Works that the city of San Marino wasn't interested. I don't know that. I haven't seen the communication on that. And until we produce the warrant sheet to show if a guideline is met, I don't know what their position is. So I think it's important to keep that on the list. I think it's also important to note that it is a shared intersection. I don't know exactly if they have one leg or 1.5 legs, whatever it is. I think if the information should show that a warrant is met, they would have to participate because they share the intersection with us. So the cost of the city of South Pasadena might not be a full 400,000. We say here in the last sentence, our share might be 300,000. But anyway, I consider this a project worth pursuing. Not sure I'd make it number one, but I think it's important. On Columbia Street, we were told by the former Public Works Director that the city of Pasadena was not interested in participating on the restriping project. Then we saw a communication from the city of Pasadena indicating they are interested in adding a through lane to eliminate the confusion and the passing on the right and the rear ends and such. Their proposal would remove parking. Our proposal would not remove parking. And I think it would be helpful for maybe if we met in the field at some point, just to go over their proposal and the proposal we have here and coordinate with the city of Pasadena on this project. Since they've already indicated that they are interested in making a striping improvement to eliminate the problems on Columbia, they've virtually in effect have committed to implementing half the project that we propose here. So I think probably we could consider revising our cost estimate for the city to maybe $100,000. I think that would be a good faith effort on our part because the city of Pasadena owns most of the street and they've already indicated some sort of commitment to make the improvement. So I would think the cost to the city of South Pasadena at this point could be reduced in that the city of Pasadena owns most of Columbia Street and they're willing to participate in an improvement. On Orange Grove Avenue, to me, that would be my highest priority. Probably 500,000 is a little on the low side. If we reduce Columbia down to 100,000, then that would make 700,000 available for Orange Grove. But as has been indicated and communicated to this commission on several occasions, persons who drive it indicate that the merging of the two southbound lanes in a reverse curve situation is not ideal. And it only makes sense to get people all the way to the parkway, the freeway, and not merge them just abruptly, you know, a block before then or 2 blocks before that. So I consider that very important from a safety standpoint and from a traffic flow standpoint. Certainly, we've had a lot of communications to this commission on it. Going on to Greville and Fair Oaks, I think the question was a good one, and it was asked, can we do it through interim measures? The issues there, as we delineate here, you have to put in a compliant access ramp. We've got that horrendous looking 14-inch curb there now that is not safe, puts pedestrians in a compromising situation. If you look at the curb on the northeast corner, there are plenty of scrapes, plenty of tire marks, inches from where pedestrians stand, because cars cannot easily negotiate the very small curb turn. So you have to put in a compliant access ramp. You need to ramp down at the appropriate rate, whatever it is, 8.33% or 7.5%, whatever is being used now. To do that, you need to set the mast arm a little bit further to the north so that you have enough room for a wheelchair user to get by the mast arm, then go down the ramp. So that's why we had 200,000 here. I was using roughly $50,000, $75,000 to relocate the mast arm signal off the bridge structure, but still within the fill portion of the parkway below. And then you would need money to restripe and resign and like that. Maybe it could be done for slightly under 200,000, but that would be my informed best estimate. On the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, those are important projects for the city to protect pedestrians. But as you pointed out, Mr. Gerber, there are various funding sources, especially for pedestrian improvements. There are many buckets for that. And I think if we weren't able to finance everything we want to through Measure M funds, including these RRFBs, I think there are other funding sources that can readily be found to fill in the gap. So kind of my initial priorities would be number one, Orange Grove Avenue at 700,000. Number two, Columbia Street at 100,000. Number three, Garfield and Monterey, traffic signal. I'd keep that at 400,000. And then number four, Greville Street, 200,000. And I guess there's 7 projects and I'm counting 6, so I'm a little confused.
Would it be then the beacons and then the 2 reserve projects
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
that's it. Maybe
at
that's
the
it.
end?
So that's kind of my sense of where my priorities would be. Certainly we can, interactively discuss that.
So I just want, before everybody wants to speak and I want to make sure everybody does. I just wanted to clarify something with Commissioner Fisher. When we talk about number 2, and you mentioned 300,000 maybe would be closer to 100,000. I just wanted to remind you, so there's restriping, but then if you turn the page, we also talk about some traffic signal modifications at Columbia and Orange Grove.
Right.
And I just don't know if that is part of the reason why we had a higher number. Or if you
Well-
think that the 100 still is okay.
Well, I think at the time we were told that the city of Pasadena is not interested, so that the entire burden would fall on the city of South Pasadena. But we do indicate at the end of the detailed project description that the signal improvements would be programmed as part of the Fremont Avenue Measure R corridor project or other grant funding to be identified, but not part of this
Okay.
Measure M project. So we were expecting, again, that there are other projects in the city that are adjacent or related that we could draw on for the more capital intensive signal projects.
Okay, so if we're talking about Measure M funded projects for number 2, right? Would
Yes.
it actually, would we basically be not include, the last paragraph basically would not be applicable? That last paragraph is to be funded otherwise. Is that? You're reminding me of what we talked about months ago, which I appreciate. And I just wanted to make sure I'm confirming what we're looking Measure M to fund.
Measure M, as I understand it, my way of thinking would be Measure M funds for Columbia would be $100,000. And then the more capital intensive signal improvements would be part of Measure R.
So would that be like the last 2 paragraphs, at Orange Grove, a protected left arrow, possibly with split
Yeah.
phasing,
Yes,
and then the final paragraph there.
yes.
Would that also be possible where that's Pasadena then would help cover some of that as well? If they're, right now we think that they're more open to supporting and funding.
Well, I'll note that city of Pasadena, after an accident and a lawsuit, for which they also tried to involve the city of South Pasadena, they put in a leading pedestrian interval. So I think the city of Pasadena is interested in making improvements there. They, again, put in the leading pedestrian interval on their own, and having observed that intersection for many years, and I know that Commissioner Abelson has observed it as well, I have to think they would be interested at some point in a left turn lane and a protected arrow, and that the majority move there is westbound to southbound left turns. And because it is such a predominant move, it sometimes causes a little confusion for the eastbound traffic. You're not sure if they're going to go through or turn left. And so
I'm gonna clarify Commissioner Fisher's clarification of my clarification. I actually read the final paragraph of number 2, and really what it is the paragraph break is sort of wrong. So if you look at the final paragraph, the first sentence really belongs with the paragraph correct immediately above it. And then it says, signal modernization and upgrades ultimately would be required at the Fremont Pasadena offset. And that's where we were talking about using Measure R money, because that's what Measure R money is targeted towards. Does that make sense to you in terms of a clarification? So that everything up to the sentence that starts signal modernization would be a contemplated Measure M project, but that's signal modernization to the end, which really focuses on the Fremont intersection, would be the Measure R funded or otherwise funded. Does that make sense?
I can see that logic, yes.
Okay. I didn't mean to go into excruciating detail. I just wanted to clarify what we were talking about. Okay.
And again, it would be a joint funding effort between our city and the city of Pasadena. I think we'd want to have good faith funds here to show that we want to participate. Keep in mind, they own 95% of the street, so they would have to participate heavily.
Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate my fellow commissioners' feedback and input on this. I guess where I come from is I know, like Measure M, I'm thinking back to when the voters voted on it and the spirit of it. If I remember correctly, there were a lot of bike advocates and pedestrian advocates really campaigning for this and as a way to further active transportation in the county. And looking at our list, I understand Mr. Gerber's point about potentially finding other funding sources for the RFPs. But we haven't found those funding sources. Those projects we haven't moved forward with those projects. So for whatever reason, and so I would be supportive of, or I would like to see those prioritized. I think they're cheaper, and I think more residents get to see their Measure M dollars spent throughout the entire city. we're also missing any kind of bike project on our list, and I know that's that we've heard that through public comment. And so just in the active transportation world, I would like to see one of those projects at least higher on our list. I agree that we don't have a warrant analysis for Garfield Avenue and Monterey Road. I wouldn't feel that's really not high on my list without a warrant analysis. And regarding Orange Grove, I understand the collision data that we've received through public comment. However, we haven't received any hard data. And I don't know what the collisions were like before it was reduced down to one lane in each direction. We can say that we're reducing it down to one lane will be safer, but it feels like a theory without data, given that we had that configuration prior. And so I know looking back at Tim's data, I see that there was one severe injury southbound within the past 10 years. I would want to know, like, was there one severe injury prior to that? You know, what were crashes like before then, before we move forward with that? And so that's why I have some concerns with that one, and especially because we haven't done any kind of community outreach for that project. That was a pretty transformative effort, going 2 lanes to 1 lane. And I would imagine $500,000 would not cover the amount of communications work that would need to be done to really make sure the community has some input on that project. So my priorities would be the Beacons 1, Columbia 2, Grevillea 3, Garfield Monterey 4, and Orange Grove 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dunlap. Okay. Anybody else wish to weigh in? We have some divergent views here. I'll comment on a couple of your comments, Commissioner Dunlap. So the Garfield and Monterey Road signal, just to take one, that has been a Measure M project for 2 to 3 years. And we had, besides what we discussed here, we'd had multiple hearings and meetings at the prior Public Works Commission. And that was on the list that went to City Council, and they had a hearing and approved it. So that's from that perspective, it's been heard and I think considered pretty fully. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be the warrant analysis, and if it's warranted, it is, and if it's not, it's not. But my thought is, wherever it is on the list, if it's warranted, then it would seem like it would be important. Just so as Orange Grove and Monterey was, which was done at the instance of the prior commission. The warrant came out and it was supported. So I just want to say that wherever it is, if there's no warrant support for it, it's not going to happen, right? And the 2 lanes to 1, the only thing I can say is, I mean, I've seen multiple reports of accidents on Orange Grove at that point. And they seem to all be related to the fact that the 2 lanes abruptly merge into one at a curve. I guess it's a reverse curve is the term. Whereas previously there were 2 lanes. I don't have the accident history from before, but it seems like there's a safety issue there, given the frequency of reports of accidents. And I know SPPD has been out many times. Injury, I'm not sure, right? So that's just information for whatever it's worth. Yeah.
And I think one of the frustrations we have, that I have as a commissioner, but it's been this way the whole time I've been a commissioner, is the data that we'd like to have all the traffic studies lag behind our project development. We often don't have the data we would like to have to make informed decisions on this. It seems like unless we get the project on the list for Garfield Monterey, No one's going to start the warrant study. No one's going to commit the consultant to do the counts or whatever. So sometimes getting it on the list propels the initiation of the study. But you're right. I'd like to see the data. The data isn't there yet. Regarding Orange Grove, I'll point out that the lane drop, from what I have observed, does not meet NHCD standards. So I think that's a factor. I've observed a number of the decorative concrete street light poles that have been knocked down multiple times. I don't know whether they've been reported as injuries, but I know if you hit one of those babies, you're a little bit shaken up. And I've seen at least 3 of those poles knocked down in the last few years. But anyway, those are my comments on that. Any other comments? I think it was mentioned that we'd like to see more bikeway and pedestrian projects. I think those are worthy. But again, I'll point out that with the regional funding made available through other sources, there are many sources for pedestrian and bike facility projects, many buckets to turn to. But what we have been concentrating on when we first developed the concept for the Measure M projects was to look at traffic entering the city through the corridors of the city from all around, and where are the bottlenecks, where are the problems. And that's why we picked one at Garfield and Monterey, one on Columbia, one on Orange Grove, at the biggest bottleneck in the city, Grevelia and Fair Oaks, et cetera, just to try to spread around the projects where we thought we had significant problems and congestion and delay. So that was kind of the thinking. I'm not saying it was the only way to go, but that was the thinking at the time that we developed several of these projects.
Go ahead.
The other thing in regards to the bicycle plan, I believe the other thing was being looked at was how the general plan was going to be finally coming together, and that the whole bicycle plan was going to be kind of layered onto that. So it's kind of like you didn't want to do things regarding the bicycle plans and all that while we were still developing the overall general plan with the city. I think there was also discussion about potential connections and corridors, going back into the connections into Alhambra, connections back into Pasadena. I mean, that as we looked at our general plan, how it's going to merge with the regional and other cities, how bicycles would be connected, similar to what was done with the, what I want to call it, the Arroyo connector that's down near the Arroyo and the stables that connects all the way from Pasadena all the way down. So that was done and is looked at as sort of one of those kind of objectives that we could do from an overall pedestrian bicycling that really connects the region, as opposed to what we've done, just like the limited stuff we've done in El Centro, what we've done on Mission, but from a more strategic standpoint, as opposed to just saying we're going to add another bike lane on, on this street or that street. Which my understanding is we were, as a city itself, and I don't know if the council member could speak to that. I know it's come up, and Michael Cacciati, council member, has been very much an advocate for bicycling for decades. Has sort of been captaining that, but knows that we don't want to get ahead of it. We want to do it in a real strategic way.
Thank you. A question for Commissioner Dunlap. Looking at the, I guess it's 5 RRFB proposed locations. I think when you were talking, you mentioned that there might be some that might be more may command more attention than others, or are there 1 or 2 here that you think are more urgent or important or significant than perhaps the others? Or do you see them all sort of equal?
Of these, I would see anything really like RFP I would probably prioritize like, but I know Ferris is loose. You really don't have like big can shoot fast when you and then maybe one of the
And have you seen high pedestrian crossing volume at these locations?
I in full disclosure,
That's fair.
I definitely see this. As far as the other two, there could be.
Thank you.
Could I add on to that?
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Commissioner Liu.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I want to note that I think the RFPs as listed in this bullet point list seem to be prioritized and kind of, they seem already prioritized actually, just based on what we know of Fair Oaks and Spruce and the geometrics of that crossing. Huntington and then Meridian and Bank as kind of the last of the four. I just think that we shouldn't necessarily leave this off the list. I think it can be moved up just because the fact that we do have unmarked crosswalks across 2 6-lane roads is a big concern and not something that I want to see improved further down the road. I'd rather see this as I think this is an urgent improvement. I think it's a big safety concern that the city should be very, very much concerned about, especially since they are marked today. If they were not marked crosswalks, then there could be an argument that this could be a future project, but as these are existing crosswalks, I do feel more of a sense of urgency for them. One question I do have about Revelia, kind of changing gears and semi-related to the RFPs, is that regarding the cost, I don't know if anyone has an answer to this because I certainly have no idea, but my feeling of looking at that northeast corner of Grevillea and Fair Oaks is that I can't imagine it was designed that way on purpose without some significant constraints that prevented them from providing a more conventional blended transition or a more conventional approach to that curb ramp. So I'm wondering if anyone has any background on why it's designed the way it is, because I imagine if it's only $200,000 to design it right, it would have been designed right in the first place.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, I had some discussions with, refresh my memory, Raphael.
Raul Casillas?
Rafael.
Rafael Casillas. Yeah.
I had some discussions when they were starting to lay concrete. And he said the concern was providing the right slope for the access ramp. And they did that switchback, that unique design, because they wanted to come down at a lower slope. They could have done that by relocating the signal pole so that they could start the slope here rather than where it is and do that switchback. I'm sorry. And so they constructed it once and I said, it's getting hit. So they constructed it a second time, but with minor modification. And I can't go into detail to describe how they changed it, but ultimately it was a minor change of the same basic design. And a little frustrated by what they ended up with, but the concrete was poured. Essentially, it came down to getting the right slope for the access ramp. And as you know, Fair Oaks Avenue is already on a slight downslope as it approaches the downtown area. So that's why you have to go a little bit further back to get that, whatever, 8% slope. But again, it could have been done by moving the mast arm pole about 10 feet back, but they didn't want to touch it at the time. So they didn't even consider that option. So that's why we ended up with the kind of high curb and the switchback design.
Thank you.
Regarding the RRFBs, I'll point out that the manual on uniform traffic control devices indicates that where you have high speeds, and I can give you the threshold values if you want, high speeds, high volume, that you need special controls to ensure this better safety for pedestrians. You need special measures, not just a standard mark crosswalk, but you start to need the activated devices and such. And so Fair Oaks Avenue at Spruce, which is 3 lanes each way, at that location, Huntington at Court, we know Huntington is multi-lane street, 40 miles an hour, Huntington and Maple. The only one that doesn't fit that description of high speed, high volume, multiple lanes is Meridian and Bank. But I think when we have the lively discussion of Meridian and Oak, we heard comment that, well, what about Meridian and Bank? That's a high school crossing. A lot of students crossing there. You probably need special controls for the number of students crossing there. So that's why we put Meridian and Bank on the list. It's not necessarily high speed, multi-lane, but it is right at the entrance to the high school.
And I'll just note that I believe it's number is 3 of RFBs that we have currently in development. I think 2 on Mission, right? 1 at Fairview, 1 at Diamond, I think. And then there's 1 on Fremont and Oxley that were approved quite some time ago and are supposed to be in design and installed at some point. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Fremont and Linden, right? And then Mission and at Fairview, Mission at Diamond, right? All crossings where we have those paddles, those in the middle of the street. I don't know what the timing is. I don't know if staff happens to know when we're going to see them. I know they've been in the works for quite some time.
And Mr. Chair, I also believe at one point there was a question that at the time Director Abbas shared that there was something about there was 4, but they thought they could get the 5th in. There was a question.
I think he was,
There was, we were looking, he was trying to get more potentially into that, whatever the contract was, or if I recall.
I think
someone
that
else
was-
might Remember that.
I think that was part of a discussion that we don't want to revisit. Yeah, the stop sign took care of that.
Right,
That
but
was one of
but
the,
I'm saying there was a discussion about
right,
those installations.
right. So anyway, I didn't mean to, I just, I brought it up because we have 3 currently in the works that are from alternate source of funding from some time ago, actually. Originally, they were supposed to be in roadway lights and now they're RFBs, right? It would be interesting to see those implemented, the 2 on Mission and the 1 on Fremont, and sort of see how they are in operation and how successful they are. You know, and those are streets that are narrower streets than Fair Oaks and Huntington. So I'm just wondering, you know, the 2 Mission locations, the Fremont location, I think those were chosen because they're high volume crossings. 2 are in a commercial district. 1 is adjacent to the high school. Those are the ones that are already happening. So I wonder about Fair Oaks and Huntington. I mean, what is the volume of folks that are who are crossing, and are there safety issues? Now, I do remember that every once in a while the police department would have some kind of an operation. I think it was Huntington and Court, actually. They've done it a couple of times where there's a marked crossing but drivers tend not to stop for folks in the crosswalk, and they would have like a sting, so to speak. So I guess there's some level of volume. I just don't know what it is. What I'm trying to do is sort of harmonize two very divergent points of view in terms of the priorities. So so I'm wondering, if we look at RFPs, and I guess if the figure is 300,000 and we're talking about 4 locations, right? The 5th is just removing an existing crosswalk, I believe. So
Always do this.
is it, what did you say?
You can sit down.
Oh,
Just stand there the
let's
whole
make them
time.
stand.
I was saying don't mind because I need to write a few things down. So it's easier. here.
Welcome to MTech.
Yeah, you ain't seen nothing yet. Would it be possible to, because personally, I think they should be low on the list, but we have some different opinions. I'm wondering if there are a couple locations we can pick to put towards the top without putting them all. One, to sort of as some kind of a way to compromise, and then 2, so that there's more money available for some of these other things. And then some of the other ones can be done. We can keep them on a CIP list or something like that. And when funding becomes available, do them. It's just an idea.
Can I ask a question about the RFPs? We have, I think it's pretty clear on a narrow street, Mission and Fremont, drivers are gonna know exactly why that thing is flashing, because they're gonna see the pedestrian. My question is on those very broad streets, does introducing an RFP create any driver confusion? Is there any studies on that? Obviously, you wanna signal that there's a pedestrian out there, but does it actually create some collateral effect with drivers because they think they have to stop, and all of a sudden now they're stopping in the middle of traffic when there's a pedestrian that's 4 lanes away. And if it is, I assume it's a continuum of pedestrian safety control. You could put in a pedestrian crossing with a signaled pedestrian crossing as the next step up. So I don't know if there's any gradation you want to make based on the fact that an RRFB in a really high volume, very wide street creates secondary effects that may create, may mitigate the safety you're trying to create for pedestrians.
Right. That's a good point that was lurking in the back of my mind, is sort of that false sense of security. It's one thing when it's a narrow street, you press a button and the drivers can relatively easily see you and the indicators and make the appropriate adjustments and stop or slow down. But on a wide street, on a high speed street, are we potentially giving pedestrians a sense of safety that maybe no matter what we do, unless it's a fully controlled intersection, they're not going to have? So that was just, I'm glad you mentioned it because it was lurking in the back of my mind. It's just, but I'd be interested to hear what the engineers have to say. Commissioner Dunlap?
I agree. I think when I think of I'm careful when I say like an RFP is somewhat a minimum. It's definitely not kind of as we were talking, I pulled up a chart by the FHWA and they recommend on streets that are over 15,000 ADT, 3 lanes in each direction with a raised median. The control is actually a pedestrian hybrid beacon. So a hawk signal is kind of what FHWA's guidance is saying you should err on the side of. So some sort of more robust control would be ideal. However, those are expensive. You know what I mean? And I think there's even some people don't like the hawk beacons. And so I think the RFPs are, a lot of jurisdictions are using those sort of as that quick measure that can be put in relatively quickly. I don't think they're perfect, but I do think that they increase driver compliance of pedestrians crossing the street. So if a driver sees that flashing, it's not guaranteed they'll stop, but I think they are more likely to stop if that is flashing. I'll defer to my other engineers if they want to opine.
Pressure,
Yeah,
pressure.
I I would agree with that FHWA guidance. I do see the concern that if you have a 6-lane divided road like Huntington or Fair Oaks, that an RFB may signal to someone in an outer lane that there's a pedestrian starting crossing on the other side. I believe on wider streets, the application of an RFB would require additional lights in the median. So instead of having just posts on either side, if it's an especially wide median, like Fair Oaks, may end up with 4, depending on the location, 2 on each side, as it is a 3-lane street. But I'm just stuck on the fact that we do have these marked crosswalks that are uncontrolled at these locations that geometrically would warrant these. I should say that more carefully because different states have a different idea on this, but I do not believe that these crossings at Fair Oaks and Huntington would warrant based on pedestrian volumes. And that's a little bit of a chicken and egg issue that's being discussed by other states. And I know, I believe it was either Oregon or Washington DOT that has some sort of guidance that obviously we're in California, but they do bring up a good point that if you are looking at marked crossings and looking at pedestrian volume warrants, the geometrics of your crossing may be discouraging to pedestrians from ever crossing in the first place. So I can see that it would be understandable that these may not warrant based on pedestrians, but that is something that we should note is kind of a blind spot when it comes to this exact application. With that being said, I think an RFB is an improvement over what is currently nothing. So that's why I still think it is the right direction to go in when it comes to enhancing the ability for pedestrians to cross at these locations.
Thank you, Commissioner Liu. And I'm going to recognize Commissioner Fisher in a second. I was just looking at the map. Sometimes it comes in handy. So I was just noticing that. So Spruce is 1 block north of Fair Oaks and Huntington, right? Which is
Yes.
controlled by multiple signals. And then 2 blocks north is Oak, which is also signalized, right? So there's protected crosswalks either 2 blocks north or 1 block south. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Okay.
I would say there's use of that crosswalk.
I'm sorry?
There's use of that crosswalk.
Oh, yeah, okay. No, I just get my bearings. Okay.
And can I say, like, Chair, I appreciate your consideration of, trying to accommodate, I think, all of our requests and concerns in this. I understand that we probably have divergent views on some of these ideas. And so I appreciate it. And to be honest, it's a little bit of a tough situation to be put into to rank these projects, given that we know we probably differ and on their prioritization among us individually. So I appreciate your consideration in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's tough to be the chair sometimes. Now, I appreciate the back and forth. I think it's really helpful. Okay, Commissioner Fisher.
Well, I was just going to add on to Councilman Primus' question, which was a good question. Yes, there's a whole gradation of what you can do for pedestrians. At the very minimum, you have an unmarked crosswalk, and you can go to a marked crosswalk, then a marked crosswalk with signs. At the other end of the spectrum is a full traffic signal, where you got the red, yellow, and green. That's the ultimate in control, but we're talking 400,000 for installation. The MUTCD says when you have these conditions, high volume, high speeds, you need special measures. They allow some flexibility in what those special measures could be. So it could be a pedestrian hybrid beacon, which rests in dark and then flashes red like a train signal, and then et cetera. That would be the next step before a full traffic signal. And then there's the rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which doesn't require you to stop, but tells you in real time that there's a pedestrian crossing and has a special flashing rate. And that has a long history. It was experimented with several cities before it was allowed to be an interim improvement in the MUTCD. It does show that compliance by motorists is greater when you have the activated crossing there. And as has been indicated before, it's important on a wide street where you have a median, such as on Fair Oaks at Spruce or Huntington Drive, that you not only put a flashing device on the right side of the roadway, but in the median side of the roadway as well, so that their view is always seeing the flashing lights. It's no guarantee that motorists are going to stop, but a significantly higher percentage of motorists stop than if you just had a marked crosswalk with signs alone. So there's this whole gradation, and it depends on how much you want to spend given how much pedestrian activity you have there. So that's kind of a policy or judgment call.
Commissioner Hughes? Any thoughts?
I
Any
think-
additional thoughts?
Well, I think there's been many important points made, and it is a balancing act. And I more feel like, I think we've got the funding. I think the funding will be there. I think funding will be there to get all of this done. So part of it is also what can be done most expediently, expeditiously, that we could, is that also a factor? Meaning like, we need to do the warrant study, we need to do that for the signals. So should that automatically go further down the list because, it's going to take more time? What can we get out, get executed quickly to show the residents and those that traverse South Pasadena in our region that we're making improvements?
That's-
That action is on the ground, because, and I've said this before, one of the frustrations of the community that I keep hearing is that, the tunnel's gone, 710's gone. All that money we fought and used and spent over decades, where is that money? Why can't we see something now? Why can't we see improvements to our transportation now? For many, many years, nothing was done because the city fought to keep its integrity and to keep the freeway from coming through. So now's the time to show the community, those that are still the freeway fighters that are around, that their fight was not for naught, that the transportation improvements still can take place. We can be a really good neighbor, really partner with our sister cities and improve the regional transportation in a way that's sustainable, that's community minded, that is touching pedestrians, touching bicycle, multimodal transportation, but in ways that are effective through all the things we're doing, whether it's the Measure M projects, the Measure R projects, the road and funds, our capital improvement efforts, and then whatever we get from oncoming infrastructure, federal funds. But that we can do this. We can make these improvements and we can have an impact.
So I'll say to that, amen, of course, because I'm one of the most frustrated in terms of not being able to move things forward. So, but if I look at all these projects, none of them is simple. None of them is straightforward. Even the RFPs, they're all, as far as we know, we want them all done, right? But let's say they're top of the list. Well, the ones across the major streets are not simple and they're not cheap, right? And they're going to require some study and analysis. So, I mean, no matter what we do, there's some ramp up, no pun intended, right? So involved. I mean, personally, I see the RFPs lower on the list, but I want to see if there's something we can do because it's important to members of the commission and therefore the community. So I was just looking, I was trying to take notes as people were expressing their priorities. So I think maybe I'll just try to knock them down. The reserve, what we're called the reserve projects on the project description list from August, okay? It's number 6 on the project description list. Is it fair to say that we all agree that those 2 bulleted projects listed under item 6R should be at the bottom of the list in terms of priorities? Is that fair?
I would
Okay.
agree with that.
All right, well, that's 2 down. Okay. So we'll make those 6 and 7 in the order that they appear on the project description list, if that's okay. Then I was comparing Commissioner Dunlap's list with Commissioner Fisher's list, and miraculously, they both agreed that Columbia Street was number 2. So that's something. So just thinking if we're gonna go that route, you know, that of course that leaves 1, 3, 4, and 5 left. The comments about it seems like Orange Grove Avenue. I know it's very important to Commissioner Fisher. It's very important to me, and I think it's very important it's very important not only from the accidents. I think it's also important because by choking traffic on a major street, the city inadvertently shifted traffic into the neighboring residential communities, both east and west of Orange Grove. Orange Grove is supposed to be a connector all the way to Mission, but what ends up happening is, unless you're going to the freeway, you don't really take it going southerly because there's too much traffic, and it bottlenecks at the signal at the freeway interchange. So what people do is they go east or west and cut through the neighborhoods to get to Mission Street. That's the secondary effect. The bigger issue for me is the accidents, which we've heard about regularly. So, and then I'm taking into account Commissioner Liu's comments about how Orange Grove and Columbia are related. So it would make sense that Orange Grove would be adjacent to Columbia, not just physically, but also in terms of priority. So it's a question of, if we agree that Columbia is 2, then it's a question of whether Orange Grove is 1 or 3, assuming you buy my analysis and Commissioner Liu's analysis. The Garfield to Monterey Road signal, Commissioner Fisher had it 3, Commissioner Dunlap had it at 4. I would put it on the higher end and not the lower end. I mean, if it's warranted, it needs to go in, and if it's not warranted, it won't. And the warrant analysis should have already been done, but it hasn't been, but it should be done. It seems like that's going to be the determining factor. So I prefer to see it towards the top of the list. And then, but they also have the RFBs. So we've got challenges here. And then we have Greville and Fair Oaks. Commissioner Fisher has it at 4. Commissioner Dunlap has it at 3. I think we really, I'm sorry, I'm speaking in circles, but I'm really trying to get to a solution. I think we really have to make a decision on the RFBs. Either they're at the top of the list, as I think Commissioners Liu and Dunlap have suggested, or they're towards the bottom of the list. I think is I and Commissioner Fisher are sort of thinking. Or the third option is we sort of split them. Now, does anybody have any additional thoughts on,
Can I ask a question, Chair, to staff?
please?
Do you have any counts at Garfield at Monterey? Like any volumes?
I don't know, to be
Yeah.
honest. I don't know. I don't think that we do, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Because I mean, a warrant, a traffic signal warrant can be done, and if you have the data in front of you, it can be done in under an hour. It's a spreadsheet, and you enter the numbers, and it tells you if something meet or it doesn't meet. Like,
I mean, do you agree that if a warrant analysis is done and it's found to be warranted, it should go in?
yes, yeah, there's a warrant analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that has to be done no matter what, right? You can't put a signal in without that. Is that a fair statement?
Satisfaction of a warrant doesn't require that it go
Right.
in, but requires that you give very careful consideration. to putting it
It needs to be a study,
in. Yeah,
right?
and again, that's the frustration we have with all these projects, we don't have the data. The data lags behind. I wish the data were available before we have to act on this, but that hasn't been my experience.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. What if I make a suggestion that I think is for consideration? If Orange Grove was number 1, Columbia number 2, the Beacons number 3, Revelia number 4, Garfield number 5, knowing that we have to do the warrants and all of that, and then we have our 6 and 7.
So thank you for your assistance. Much appreciated. So my only thought is I'm a little uncomfortable with the Greville and Fair Oaks being so low on the list.
But the thought might be that Orange Grove, we know we have this safety issue there. So that, to me, gives it kind of that precedence. Columbia, we might be saving the money on, which Commissioner Fisher brought up because Pasadena might be more in tune to help us. The beacons for the safety, and again, maybe there's costs that we could look at there, and maybe again we don't do all of them. And then the Grevilla, which could also be wrapped into the Measure R project, so maybe we don't need to do it on this list. And then the Garfield, because we do have to do the study and all of that, so that might take us more time. But the others, we could maybe get into design and estimate much more quickly. As a
Okay.
suggested list.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Commissioner Fisher.
Yeah, on the RRFBs, again, if they can't be completely financed through the Measure M funds, there are other bucket sources. There are other funds for pedestrian and bikeway amenities. Funds for those will be found. I would not want to characterize this that it's near the bottom of the list, but that it's on the list. And we support pedestrian safety. And that's why we have this project here. I believe that given that there's the availability of other funds that I'm sure could be found if necessary, that it should be number 5 on the list. I wouldn't want to split up the projects because I think if we're going to maintain marked crosswalks across busy high-speed streets, we need to put in the appropriate active traffic controls to better forewarn motorists of the presence of pedestrians and to help pedestrians get across where they need to get across. So I would keep it on the list. I would keep it number 5. It's on the list and we're committed to pedestrian safety. I wouldn't want to characterize it as being on the bottom of the list. That's my comment on that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Liu.
All right, I agree with all of that. I think that makes sense. I think there definitely is more funding for pedestrian improvements, such as through the HSIP grant program. But as part of that, to just kind of ease my mind about the pursuit of other buckets of money for some of these improvements is, I guess my question for city staff is, are we proactive when it comes to pursuing these grants, like either through city staff time or through a consultant that may be, helping us pursue grants, such as kind of what we had with Active SGV and their Open Streets program and things like that?
Yes. So I'd say that there's multiple avenues for that. In addition to staff pursuing grant opportunities, we heavily rely on our regional partners for that, such as Active SGV. We also have a lot of communication from council members and commission members who happen to find information and forward it to our staff. I will say that part of the motivation for this exercise is that we have a limited staff resources. In order for us to manage grant funding, pursue other types of projects, not just in the transportation sector, but across public works, it's important for us to prioritize, what's on our to-do list, I'll say. So this certainly wasn't intended to frustrate the commission in any way. In fact, it's the opposite. At some point, a decision will be made about which projects we go first and which our staff can handle appropriately. This is certainly a discussion that'll be happening on a much larger scale during the CIP discussions over the next few months and how to prioritize them realistically so that staff can actually practically achieve some of these projects. So having the conversation now versus having it later, say that we didn't prioritize these and funding was approved, at some point we would still have to decide what to do first. So let me just add that as far as any sort of comments in terms of the difficulty in prioritizing it. Certainly city staff appreciates your input on this. And I think there's a preference from this commission leaning towards that direction, that there is input to be made about the prioritization versus leaving it solely in staff's hands to figure out which projects are to be scheduled at which point in time. So I'll just say that. So to answer your comment, yes, with regard to the grant funding, I will say that, the comment about balance is very poignant. Certainly there are multiple funding sources here. We take a look at the RFFBs, for example. We're soon to be kicking off our north-south Fair Oaks corridor project, which the scope of work is to look at that entire corridor all the way down to Alhambra, which certainly would include these locations that we're talking about, the RFFBs, the Fair Oaks and Spruce Street. So the question becomes, is this something that we want to tag as an earlier project with the Measure M funding versus a later project with the Measure R funding, and would address the vehicular component of that and how the RFBs affect the traffic in that north-south corridor study. So there's a lot of questions here. There's a lot of things to consider. The exercise here is to get your input. Certainly things may change over the amount of time. These are going to take time to implement. But yes, multiple grant funding sources. There's many ways for these to get accomplished. The question before you is about balancing that in best way possible. Now, I'll just reiterate that it's not one way to go about that is to order them 1 through 7. You could group them as we discussed, and certainly if you have, I hope this isn't the case, but I'm just going to suggest this. If you find that you can't prioritize them, we could just submit them as is. The original plan was to submit them as is and then deal with the prioritization question later. But it seems to me that it's the commission's choice to actually discuss this at that time and provide staff direction with which projects you desire to prioritize ahead of others. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Sure.
The comment about the inclusion of assessing this through the Fair Oaks Corridor project really answered the question that I had about not leaving the RFPs out. So that completely addressed it. Thank you. So with that said, I think I'm happy to, at least with my ranking, is to just swap 3 and 1 and take Orange Grove to number 1 and maybe put Garfield and Monterey down to either 3 or 4. I'm okay with either, with Greville and Fair Oaks kind of about the same for me, with somewhere in the middle there, and leaving the RFBs as part of a bigger project. I do want to stress that I really like Orange Grove at 1. I feel that is both a safety issue and a regional traffic issue that does create some cut-through traffic into neighborhoods. And I should know because I am that cut-through traffic sometimes. So I'd be happy to prioritize that first. I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Liu. So I think there's more or less a consensus among most Because the sense I get is Orange Grove 1, Columbia Street 2, Garfield and Monterey 3, Grevillea Street 4, RFBs 5, and then 6 and 7 we've already covered. And the only thing I'm trying to do is address Commissioner Dunlap's concern and see if there's whatever list or priorities we come up with, is there something else we can do to make sure? And if it's Measure R, it's Measure R, but to make sure that these locations are a citywide prioritized project, whether they're prioritized towards the top of the list of Measure M or not, that they're projects that are on the radar of the city and they're projects that the city hopefully will and can seek funding to implement. 2 comments. One, in terms of going to the Joint Powers Authority, they don't ask for a priority list. This is for the city's management of resources and such, right? Which is, of course, very
Yeah,
important.
that's our
Right.
understanding, yes.
And then I had another question that's gone, so sorry. Were you going to say something?
Well, all I can say is that, there is a larger conversation to be had with the council about our capital improvement project program. Now, as it stands, we've grouped these as like the Measure M projects in terms of the hierarchy among other priorities for the city. So for example, like the 3 RFFBs we were talking about on Fremont and Mission, those have been identified as a possible funding, HSIP funding for, I think it's on the current schedules next year for that. So that's another CIP project.
That's another what project?
That's another CIP identified project. And so what I'm getting at here is that there's always an opportunity for us to prioritize stuff outside of this conversation as a transportation priority for the city through the capital improvement program discussion.
Okay, that's helpful. And I forgot one of the things I remembered one of the things I forgot. So one, to somebody's point earlier, this Measure M list was taken originally from the list of Measure R early action projects that we'd come up with years ago as the ones that we thought were easier to implement, maybe not quite as cost intensive or time intensive, although we're here 2 years later. So that was the basis out of which many of these came. And then the other things, I thought that the city manager either had hired or was looking to hire somebody who would be focused on grants, obtaining grants for the city. Maybe I'm misremembering. Does that sound at all?
Yeah, I
Familiar?
believe that is part of the plan for the management services division.
So that's another
is to provide that assistance. Yes,
resource
exactly.
that can help us. Okay. Was it, and Commissioner Dunlap?
No, thank you, Chair. And it sounds like there's, majority consensus on the commission to have Orange Grove first. The thing I don't want to lose about that is community outreach and engagement has not been done for that project. And I think that's going to run $100,000, if not a couple $100,000. As well as I want to make sure that no environmental clearance is required. As far as like CEQA, I know that the law recently changed regarding capacity projects, and when you do a capacity project, if it increases vehicle miles traveled, doing some sort of environmental assessment, but it might not be the case for this because it is such a short segment. So I want to document those for the record, and also just that there isn't, I haven't seen data, for this project. So it sounds like the commission's ready to proceed with this, but I wanted to make sure that my concerns on this project are documented.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Okay.
Question to Commissioner Dunlap's point. We have a lot of, I believe, from 2 meetings ago, a number of the residents from Orange Grove that commented about the safety issues. We might be able to earmark some of them personally to help us with outreach.
certainly, I think that's a great idea and they should be a part of this project development.
All right, any other discussion? Commissioner
Just a-
Fisher?
Yeah, just a clarification, Ted. You indicated there might be other sources of funding for the RRFBs, for which we're programming here 300,000. So do I understand correctly that if you find alternate sources of funding, that would free up maybe up to $300,000 that could be programmed for Orange Grove or Columbia or whatever? Is that the case?
Yes, certainly. If we were to reprioritize those funding sources for a project here, that would, of course, free up that Measure M funding. We have this bucket of Measure M funding to apply to other projects. There's a large, like we've discussed, there's a large pot for Measure R funding. A lot of that's intended for the loop ramp implementation. But we have projects on the books right now looking at some of these corridors that it is likely to be very simple to implement some of these traffic control devices into that evaluation. Those are large scale evaluations with a high level scope in terms of what they're going to look at. And we could emphasize in those projects that there's strong interest, for example, for an RRFB at Fair Oaks Avenue at Spruce Street. So please consider that in your evaluation of the Fair Oaks corridor in this project.
Anything further? Okay. So it sounds like we're at the point of resolution. So I'll go ahead and, if it's all right, I'll make a motion and see where we end up. Okay, so with regard to the Measure M projects, the motion would be to prioritize them as follows. And I'll note, I'm going to look at the detailed project description list that was developed at the August meeting of this commission and use and refer to it. So starting with the highest priority to the lowest, number one would be Orange Grove Avenue between Oliver Street and the Arroyo Seco Parkway southbound on-ramp. Number two would be Columbia Street between Columbia Place, I'll say, and west of Orange Grove. Three would be Garfield Avenue and Monterey Road traffic signal. Four would be Grevilla Street near Fair Oaks Avenue. Five would be the rectangular rapid flashing beacons item. Number six would be reserve project number one, which is the Meridian Avenue and Oak Street realignment. And then number seven would be the second bulleted reserve project, which is Meridian Avenue access ramps from Kendall Avenue to Gillette Crescent. I think that reflects where the direction was headed. That's my motion.
Clarification, would you keep the estimated amounts shown or as revised?
I'm happy to accept as
difference-
revised, but which is it just item two?
For Columbia,
That
yeah,
was
it'd be item two, that which might go down to 100,000, and then Orange Grove Avenue, which might go up to 700,000.
sure, that's fine. I mean, they're just cost estimates anyway.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, so that would be part of the motion.
Sure.
Okay. I second.
Liana, should you call the roll or you want me to? Yes.
Commissioner Fisher,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Liu,
Yes.
and Commissioner Dunlap.
No.
Okay, so sounds like the motion passes 4-1. Thank you, everyone, for a robust, productive discussion, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with all of the projects, wherever they fall on the list. All right, moving forward to commission-led discussion. Item 4, SR 710 Mobility Improvement Projects Ad Hoc Committee. That would be Commissioner Fisher and I. I don't have anything specifically to contribute on this yet. So you,
Me neither.
does staff have anything you wish to share with us? Project status for Fair Oaks and
Yes, if you wish, I could share our status for those projects.
that'd be
So,
great.
I'll break this down into 4 items, I suppose, for number 4, SR 710. We've been working the last couple of weeks. I'll give you the updates the last couple of weeks at what we've accomplished for these projects. For the Fair Oaks Fiber Synchronization Project, we've been focusing on, well, one of our highest priorities in this project is making sure that we can expend the funding that's going to expire at the end of the year. And our plan to do that is by purchasing the IT equipment and utilizing some of the contractor's services to get that installed at City Hall. So we're currently working on how to implement that thin client server at City Hall and start the directional drilling installation just outside City Hall. So one of the interesting things that came up during that project in the last 2 weeks is ensuring that as we install the equipment and set up the traffic management server, that the devices out in the field along Fair Oaks aren't directly tied into the city's network as a security measure. So separating those devices on their own network, but still be able to communicate with the city so that the staff can utilize and monitor the traffic devices. So that's an issue that has to be resolved both with the contractor, Crosstown Electrical, the supplier, CT West, who, if additional server and switches needed in order to do that implementation, and then also the city's IT services provider, Acorn, who would handle the communication system between the new traffic management system and the connection to the city's network so that city staff can access the system from the city's network, whether or not they're stationed at City Hall. So we've been trying to work out those details. We've had a couple meetings. We're actually going to have a site visit on Friday here with city staff to come in and try to resolve some of those issues with the contractor. That was the earliest they could get here, and we didn't want to push it until after Thanksgiving. So we're going to be doing that this week. We'll also be taking a look at some specifics about the splice connection along Fair Oaks corridor. So we're going to take a peek into that, but that construction is sort of a secondary priority in terms of what we want to accomplish in November and December. So that's the Fair Oaks synchronization project. The north-south corridor, basically the evaluation, the study, and the design of the entire Fair Oaks corridor that we mentioned previously. We have a there was an agreement signed in September, and which included a scope of work and a cost. It's about, I think it's $788,000. The cost included items that weren't necessarily defined in that scope as part of the agreement. So a memorandum of understanding, MOU, was added to that contract to identify all of those scope items at no additional cost. In other words, the contractor had scoped those items in providing the proposal and cost. They just didn't happen to be included into the agreement. So that MOU has now been added to an already executed contract. And so we're just verifying that additional, 9 pages or so of the MOU lines up with the existing contract scope. And we plan to have that executed in hopefully the next couple of days. And then we will kick off that project with that contractor.
Is what you're referring to what we've referred to as the ITS project, the
Yes,
Rogan funds?
exactly.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. The other component of that, the large, SR 110 hook / loop ramp project. I don't have much information to report on that. Our understanding is that there was a RFP underway. We haven't reviewed that. We're trying to understand what the status of that project is. So hopefully we can come back with an update on that during our next commission meeting about what we understand that project to be.
Great. That was 3 things. Was there-
Yes, so number 4 is the Fremont Huntington MAT / Measure R project. So we have the funding agreement. From Metro, it actually was being facilitated with one of our engineering staff who, fortunately or unfortunately, got another job a few weeks ago and moved on. And so we sort of picked that back up from Metro, figured out where the funding agreement was, and that's actually working its way through the city's signature authorization to claim that $6.05 million in MAT funding, so that project can move into the RFP phase early 2022 and move through the multi-year schedule that was intended and when those funds were allocated to South Pasadena. Now, we've come to understand that that was the active transportation component of that project, and a separate allocation of the Measure R bucket to address the vehicular part of that improvement. Looks like $10 million from Measure R funding was at some point described in the MAT agreement to be joined in that project for like a $16 million combination. But that's the gap in my understanding is how that money has been allocated from the Measure R fund. And so at the moment, those are 2 separate initiatives. And so what we have to understand is how those are combined, how the funding works on the Measure R side, and see how we're going to continue with that project. But the forward motion for the Fremont active transportation component of that is fairly clear. We have the funding agreement nearly executed, and then we can move into the RFP phase for that project. So that's sort of the overview of the number 4 item, SR 710 mobility projects.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Anybody have any questions for, Commissioner Dunlap?
For the Fair Oaks project, the art on the traffic signal cabinets, will that be maintained as part of that project? Or will you be replacing cabinets?
I don't know if we had that discussion yet, but it sounds like there's some interest to keep that artwork, so we can find out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll certainly bring that up with the contractor. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Thank you for bringing
Thank
that
you.
up. That's good thought.
I know that visual artists have rights too, so you might want to check your agreements that you made with the artist to make sure you're in compliance with the Visual Artist Rights Act, I think it's called.
Thank you.
That's a good. That was also a very important project to the community. So I know thank you. That's a
And
great
Mis-
thought.
Mr. Chair, I also think that all was helped facilitated through the Chamber of Commerce. So
And
they-
Spark. I think,
as
right?
part of that art project, and also the Arts Commission. So I'm not sure, they also you need to be alerted to what was set up.
No problem. We have a very good relationship with Lori Wheeler, so we'll make sure to make that connection.
Commissioner Fisher.
On the other hand, if there are new cabinets, that's a new opportunity for art expression. So,
It's a
could be an
win-win.
update. Yeah, on the matter of the loop ramp RFP, there was a prior commitment that we reminded Mr. Shella of that since the concept of the loop ramp was developed by commission members here, that we would want to be able to review it before it goes out as a final document.
Of course, yes, I should have mentioned that. That is
Okay.
completely our intention to walk through the process. You know,
Thank
if anything demonstrates us discussing these smaller Measure M projects at length with the commission, it's very telling that, of course, a project of that size and complexity, there will be, quite a bit of communication with the commission and the public in terms of implementing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further for Mr. Gerber? Okay. Thank you for that detailed and informative report. I appreciate it. Moving right along. So number 5, Ramona Avenue Neighborhood Traffic Management Ad Hoc Committee. Essentially, that's the list of measures that, or list of recommendations that the commission put forward during the summer. I forgot which month. Relating to traffic, loading and unloading and parking in the high school and Holy Family Church School neighborhood. The only thing I know is that one of the recommendations was implemented, which was the sort of the simplest and the straightforward, which was the changing of the signing on the north curb of Rollin from no parking to no stopping, I believe. But other than that, I don't think anything further has been done. I know there've been meetings with the community and that kind of thing. And I don't know if staff has anything to add in that regard.
Yes, so that's correct. With regard to the no stopping sign, we did find that one sign might not have been changed out, so we're handling that as fast as possible. I'd say the next immediate action that we're taking with regard to the Ramona study and the traffic issues in that neighborhood, is engaging with our police department in discussing one recommendation to on the southbound Fremont side in front of the school, addressing a potential loading zone in that location. So that's one area that we have to, there's already been some discussion and some feedback from the police department in the past, so we're going to re-engage with them and discuss that item. I'll say in general, we reviewed the Ramona study. We have the MTech recommendations. I actually went on a walk with one of the residents in that area last week at 2:30 to 2:50 to witness how things how things just are real, how the traffic pattern is realized, moving up from Huntington along Ramona and then along Oak into Holy Family. It's very interesting ballet of vehicles. So yes, the ultimate the goal of the city at this point is to determine a way in order to bring the recommendations both from the commission and the study and the public comments that we've received, and facilitate some sort of stakeholder engagement with both the high school and Holy Family, the residents and the commission, the police department, and even possibly parking enforcement to talk about what our next steps with that work is. I will say that staff feel strongly that the situation has changed given the shifting the schedules of the school and may have altered the dynamics that were such a focus of the Ramona study in such a way that it seems natural that the recommendations should be altered to reflect the changes. And so we have a little bit of a boondoggle to untie in terms of how we're going to handle that. But certainly stakeholder engagement is our utmost concern in terms of resolving that issue.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher.
Yeah, you indicated you're in discussion with the police department, and I think it's important to always get their perspective and institutional memory on it. I will point out that there's been red curb on the west side of Fremont in front of the high school since before my daughter attended. And that's been approximately 20 years or more. So I don't know what police officer was around back then to know if anything was done different was around when the red curb was put in. But I think it's important that when we are trying to keep parking out of the residential neighborhood, like on Ramona, and when we have to put no stopping anytime on Rollin because parents are parking there, that it's important that we use the carrot and stick approach. The carrot is no parking here, no stopping here. I'm sorry, that's the stick. The carrot is we're providing loading for you here. So if you don't want them to load here, I think it's important to provide a place where they can load and where it's convenient and where it would be utilized. And that's why I was hoping that the proposed loading zone that we had identified in front of the high school parking lot and the high school itself could be implemented more quickly than being bogged down in studies. So I think that could have been a quick project, maybe while you're looking at some of the other recommendations that came to you. So from my perspective, I would like to see that move forward unless there's a fatal flaw or a good valid reason why it shouldn't move forward.
Thank you. And I'll just note that the list of recommendations that the ad hoc committee developed and were shared with the commission, that they were developed after the change in the schedule, right? The study, which I think it might have been Nelson Nygaard, I can't remember. That was some time ago now and was when, right? So to the extent that some of the recommendations in that older study might be outdated because of the change in schedules, ours aren't, because they're much what they were as of just a few months ago. So it'd be great if staff could look at that list and start implementing some of them. And the good news, sort of, I know the next discussion is slow streets. The good news with talking about a proposed with the loading zone is we implement it, and if for some reason, which I do not expect, there's a problem, there's a safety issue that's unanticipated, then it's easily unwound because already the area is being used. So it's just a question of making it a safer and legal use instead of one where it's haphazard and perhaps more dangerous than it needs to be. So anyway, it'd be great to try to get some of these things moving forward. Like Commissioner Fisher says, even if it's something that's simpler, more straightforward, with the idea that, removing the striping and signage, and maybe it's tape to begin, and temporary signs, and then see how it works. Just a thought. But I know the neighbors would appreciate it. Okay, so if there's nothing further on 5, we'll move to 6. Excuse me, COVID-19 ad hoc committee, and I'll sort of wrap into that the Metro Slow Streets program. So I'll, if it's okay, I'll start with the members of the committee just to see if there's anything they want to share, and then we can go to staff.
No, we don't have anything to share. We spoke with Wes from Active SGV, and he told us that you guys were working right along with city staff and that it was ongoing.
Yeah, that's what I know too. But
Sorry, I just wanted to make
if Mr. Gerver has an update.
Yeah. All right.
Am I saying your name correctly?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Gerver? Great.
it's like the baby food. Yeah, pretty straight and simple.
Or the great.
Please.
Yeah, so this is another project like the Ferrex project where we have an emphasis on work to be done before the end of the year to take advantage of grant funding. And so we are moving that project forward strategically in order to take advantage of that. So we've had several meetings with both Iteris and Alta in terms of the traffic study component of the project and the conceptual design. We have a tentative project schedule, which I'll mention in one moment, but as far as our current work, we're facilitating Iteris's communication of their data information to Alta, and also feeding Alta the information that they have requested from us. For example, making sure that our fire truck fleet, the dimensions that we're giving them for turn radiuses, can accommodate Alta's design on mission. So we do expect to have that design work done by December. Now, it's it's very important for us to receive public comment on this project, the Slow Street project. So it's very impactful for the community, and it's intentionally been made part of the scope for both Iteris and for Alta to both conduct a public discussion and also facilitate bringing this item before City Council for their review. So in working backwards from the end of the year, our final City Council meeting is December 15th. So we're targeting to bring the Slow Streets conceptual design to that December 15th City Council. Now, in order for us to do the public engagement we think is appropriate for this, that has to happen between now and then. Now, we need enough time for Alta to do their design work, cycle that information back for us to review, and then get it in front of the City Council. So, and we would like that public participation step to be done with the commission. Now, given that the commission won't be meeting till late December 21st, I think is the next meeting date, we're recommending a special meeting with this commission, preferably December 13th, which would give us a day to turn around the information for City Council on the 15th. And the reason isn't it's sooner than that is because we're respecting the amount of work that Alta has to do in order to make that happen. And they've been very, very cooperative along with Iteris in working out this schedule. Now, one other element of that is evaluating the data from Iteris that will be utilized by Alta to do the design. And so an additional option is to offer an opportunity for this commission to be involved in that review of that information from Iteris. Now, it may not make practical sense to have 3 commission meetings in the next 3 weeks for you all here. So one recommendation is to have the COVID-19 ad hoc committee review the Iteris information at the end of November and provide feedback so that that can be cycled into Alta, and then we'll bring this before the commission on December 13th and then before the council on December 15th. So it's a very expedited schedule. Hopefully everything lines up, but that's what our plan is in order for us to implement, in order for us to achieve this by the end of the year. Now, plan B is that we have submitted an extension request to Metro, both a letter, a written comment for their planning committee meeting tomorrow, and we also plan to make a verbal comment at their planning committee meeting tomorrow. And in addition, Active SGV, or is it SGV COG, actually submitted a letter in coordination with our request also to Supervisor Solis. So we're hoping that we have some more time for the project. If not, we'll at least get the design done by the end of the year. As far as implementation, that would be very tough to get done by the end of the year. There are some materials that have been stocked by the contractor to attempt to do that, but we're at least hoping to make the best of the situation and try to have that Slow Streets design completed. So, lengthy update, but hopefully that puts you on the same page. And our recommendation to have a special meeting December 13th.
Thank you, Mr. Gerber. And I appreciate your effort in trying to make this work for the city. So there are a couple of, I guess, sort of decision points. One is the commission comfortable with having a special meeting December 13th? Does that date work for addressing the?
I'm sorry, Chair Abelson, let me add that we could make that a Zoom meeting if that's much more convenient for.
What's that?
We could make that a Zoom meeting if that's convenient for the commission.
Okay. Well, then we don't get cookies. That's a problem.
Is that
Um,
if we don't receive the extension? Option A? Is option B the preferred option to get the?
Yeah,
extension of
option B
funds?
would be the preferred option, but
mm.
we're planning for option A if we don't have that.
Okay.
extension. Yes.
When do you think you'll know about an extension?
We really don't know. I
Yeah.
know that it seems like an informal request was made in the past and wasn't permitted.
That's what
So
we heard, yeah.
yeah, so we're hoping that this time we do, but we really don't know.
Okay.
All right, so is having a special meeting December 13th workable for all or most of the members of the commission, at least via Zoom? No,
Yes.
okay.
Well, I'd like to meet in person, but
I think oh, sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think we have to, if the point of this is community input, I think it's probably a more productive meeting if people are physically present and we can,
We'd
Interact
agree,
with the-
but we understand it's an imposition, so we're trying to
Okay.
make it work.
and I'm sorry I interrupted you, Mr.
No,
Fisher.
I interrupted you, sorry. But it is the holiday season. And we have another meeting scheduled for the 21st. I was wondering if it would be possible to just have one meeting that would accomplish all the business we need to take care of during December.
That is
That
the
might be on
option.
the
Essentially,
13th.
we would cancel the 21st meeting and hold a special meeting on the 13th. I'll say that that's exactly what we've done with the Public Works Commission this month because there was a scheduling conflict with the CIP special meeting. And so we're actually doing the same thing with the Public Works Commission where we canceled the regular meeting and are holding a special meeting on Thursday. So that
Well,
just,
if that's a motion, I second it. Does anyone have a problem with consolidating the two?
No problem with consolidating. I'm unavailable the 13th, but I will make sure that I pass on my comments to my fellow commissioner on the ad hoc committee.
Great. And Commissioner Hughes
Yeah.
is okay?
Yes, I think. that
So,
would
and
work.
then is the COVID-19 ad hoc committee okay with the other proposal? And that is taking a look at the ITERA studies and providing any input with staff?
Yes.
And those, is that okay with
Yeah,
you
it'll be
guys?
the highlight of my Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah. There's not a major holiday between now and then, right?
Very good, very good. Okay. So, Mr. Gerber, we were just talking amongst ourselves. So first, it looks like there's support about consolidating the special and the schedule to just having the one meeting on the 13th to take care of slow streets and our other December items, which maybe we can take a hard look at and see which actually have to be in December and which maybe we can kick to January. We may not be able to. I'm just
sure.
saying.
Yeah, and I'm finding out from staff that, and this was the issue with our Public Works Commission, that this room is pretty packed throughout November and December. So we wouldn't have the availability of this room for the commission meeting. I can find out if we get an alternate physical venue at the city that would still work. The other option is Zoom, but if it's not going to work as far as attendance from the commission, then it's a moot point anyway.
Right. Who's here on the 13th? I'm just curious.
So I could have a conversation with them to see if they'd be willing to move theirs to a Zoom meeting. That would be our next step, but it would depend
They might
again.
appreciate it.
Yes. So it would again, it would depend on your availability, of course.
Yeah, okay. So, and then the other thing I just wanted to confirm with the members of the COVID-19 committee that they were okay with the proposal of their taking a look at the ITERA studies separately and working with you directly in between meetings. So we don't have to have yet another meeting. Okay. Does that cover what staff needs from us in terms of direction on moving forward with slow streets? Is there anything else
Yes.
or no?
No, in terms of
Yes, we've taken care of it. No, there's nothing else.
in terms of accommodating a schedule in which we could submit a agenda report on the December 15th to council. So our most effective date is December 13th, giving Elta the majority of time and the time we need to turn around. We don't have to do the 13th, but that's the most efficient day if the commission can do that. So number one is that yes, that deciding on a date in place for that special meeting. And number two would be yes, the ad hoc committee reviewing
Yeah, Terrace.
the ITERIS information on or about November 30th.
So so yes to the second thing, the first, which is the date. The only note was that Commissioner Dunlap shared with us that he could not be here on the 13th. But he would share his comments and make sure they were included. Is there any flexibility in terms of the date, or it pretty much has to be on or about that date?
There is flexibility, but moving to the 14th would give us no time to prepare the item for council, and then moving it any earlier would is possible. It would just require Alta to deliver it faster, which we could talk to them about. We settled on 13th as a good compromise, but if that's not possible, we could try to push it a little further.
Commissioner Dunlap's okay with that.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I think the consensus is December 13th for our next meeting, with the idea that it would be for all things December. And then with the committee looking at the ITERIS studies. Fantastic.
Mr. Chair, you'll let us know the location, because with the desire to have public input, it's better to have it physical. Is that what
Right.
We're saying.
Yes.
Staff is on it. All right. Anything else you think we should cover? Metro COVID-19 related? I think we're good.
That's
Good. Okay. Item 7, preferential parking policy ad hoc committee. Any updates from anyone?
No update.
Same staff?
it.
You don't have to
Yep.
have one.
Well, the only update I'll share, and you may have already know, is that we reviewed the documents that were provided by the commission. It was very helpful in terms of describing the the examples from LA and Pasadena. Whether you may know that it's been emphasized in our strategic planning session that the city focus on a citywide parking management plan. And so that is being prioritized, and that would be a joint effort between community development and public works to move forward with that. So that's the only general update we have on that item.
What? That's good to hear. And I look forward when we put together our work plan, that should be something it sounds like should be on it for next year. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it looks like.
Furthering that. Okay. Mr. Fisher, I see your finger on the,
Well, I
The
was
button.
debating whether to comment, but as most of you know, there's a new law which allows garages to be converted to accessory dwelling units that reduces parking on the private property and could shift parking to the residential streets. So I just hope that any parking policy considers that there may be less available parking on the streets for new businesses and new developments.
Yes, I believe that would be the consideration, given that the primary responsibility for that policy would reside with community development. And so they would be able to tie that into their general plan for planning for ADUs throughout the city and their new housing element.
great, thank you. Anything further? No? Okay. Thank you all. All right. Next up, we have communications. City Council Liaison Communications. Councilmember Primuth, anything for us?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'll keep my report a little shorter. You obviously know the transportation-related items going to the city council. So thank you for all your work on that. We do have a very busy December calendar. Tomorrow night, we have a solid waste disposal ordinance on the agenda. We also have a discussion of the housing element update, which will take us into some very tricky policy issues as we look at how we're going to accommodate the RENA numbers. So that's far from completed, but it is important that the city council have this check-in. It's going to go back to the planning commission. It's going to go out to public comment and all those things. But so this is sort of just one of the airings of the plan. Last week, the council had a study session for developing its 5-year CIP program. So a lot of these projects were sort of looked at a little bit without a whole lot of discussion because we do want to rely on commission guidance for a lot of that. Funding sources, there's a multiplicity of funding sources. And so, we've been struggling here today, trying to figure out what are the best projects for Measure M. Well, you've got alternative sources that could bring some of these projects to completion. So, you're part of a sort of an interlocking puzzle of funding sources. So I've appreciated it as you shown that awareness. And the council did provide direction at the special study session to dedicate the cell phone tower revenue to a set aside fund for PERS pension liability with about 600,000 going toward OPEB liability. The council gave direction on needing to understand the options for how to make that contribution. It could be through a trust. It could be with a direct payment to CalPERS. So we're waiting to hear back what the options would be for that. But that would be the roughly 4 million cell phone tower revenues that have come in. And that was the Finance Commission's recommendation. So we adopted that essentially. Lots of other things going on. Looking forward to the Slow Streets unveiling. That sounds like it's going to be a really interesting project. A lot of work from staff. Very much appreciate your turnaround and compressing the timeline so that you can have commission, public input, and then bring it to the city council. Thank you for recognizing the value of all those functions. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
Chair, I have a quick question.
Commissioner Hughes.
Councilmember Scrivener. One quick question, was the decision finally made about the Edison funds that we were just going to waive that situation and not press the lawsuit and or ask the residents for the funding?
Yeah, that was the city attorney's recommendation. That was presented at a council meeting 2 weeks ago that I did not attend. I missed it for a family engagement. So I'm not sure the actual outcome. I'm pretty sure the council followed that. As you saw in the in the staff report, there are a lot of considerations that went into it. Obviously, the city relied on Edison to calculate and to provide that revenue stream to us. And Edison really failed in that. So going forward, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Looking backward, I think the city attorney's recommendation is probably the right course of action.
Thank you.
Anything else? Next up, item 9, Commissioner Communications. Why don't we go left to right, starting with Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you, Chair. I want to say thank you to Mr. Gerber for coming today and providing us so much information about projects. I got to watch the capital improvement program presentation. If you haven't seen that on the city website, there are tons of projects that really piqued my interest that seem really exciting. I won't hit you like a piñata right now to get that information out, but particularly like the Mission Street pedestrian project, I'd be more interested to kind of know like what's in the scope of that project at a future meeting. And then also particularly exciting are some of the green infrastructure projects. I know that a large portion of that falls under the Public Works Commission, but to the extent, any of that project might include some sort of above surface bioretention facility that could function as a curb extension or some sort of traffic calming impact. I think it would be cool for maybe this commission to have on its work plan a presentation kind of about those green infrastructure type projects. I know I've been involved in my own work developing guidelines and standard plans for those elements. And so certainly would love to see more of that in the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Liu, anything?
Nothing really. I just want to thank Mr. Gerber and city staff for putting together such a great report today on a number of things. So thank you for that. That's about it.
Very good, thank you. Commissioner Fisher.
First of all, I'd like to thank again Ted Gerber for being here. Your legs must be tired. You stood a long time. You really didn't need to, but it showed that you wanted to be responsive to all of our questions. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to working with you. And pleased to see Tatovic here. I know in the past, we've had a turnover of managers and staff we've worked with. I hope we have a long working relationship with both of you. Just a small item, in one of the many independent coffee shops that I patronize in South Pasadena, one of them had a flyer called Neighborhood Watch Newsletter, which is distributed by the police department. I just happened to see it inside. And one of they talk about crime prevention, where crime is occurring, helpful hints, in just a few paragraphs. So it's very helpful. I'll just pass this around, but one of them was on pedestrian safety. And so often when we have a horrific pedestrian accident in the city, this commission hears about it, and so much pressure is placed on the Public Works Department to make it safer, do something. I think it's good to see that the police department is fulfilling their role in part of the safety triad: education, enforcement, engineering. It's not just an engineering problem, but it's an educational problem. Pedestrians need to be aware of what they're doing, and it's an enforcement issue as well. So I was just glad to see the police department fulfilling their role in part of the pedestrian safety effort. That's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things. One, recently the city sent out the press release regarding the new $50,000 grant to the police department for transportation and traffic safety. And wanted to kind of earmark that, could these funds perhaps be utilized for some of these points where we have such concerns about speeding? We've heard not only that, but our truck situation and other areas where we think that we could utilize them. I know there's also pedestrian issues, and it's talked about how those funds could be used. So just, what's the plan specifically, and can this earmark itself and dovetail into all these situations we've heard and some of the projects that are in the works? Second, I wanted to bring up, and I know, and first, thank you again, Mr. Gerber, for being here, and Tatovic, thank you. We really are so happy you're with us and look forward to working with you. On our list for quite some time, there are improvements that have been earmarked for the Gold Line project at Mission, and I know it's near and dear to Commissioner Fisher's heart. He has worked quite lengthy amount of time on earmarking specifics for improvement for not only the vehicle, but the pedestrian activities that occur there. And it's been on the list. I believe $80,000 was earmarked a number of years ago for that. And those things have not come to fruition. So it's kind of one of those outstanding things that I think we really need to take care of, that really can improve, because it's such a major choke point right there. I still see people making U-turns because they don't want to wait, and the queuing is longer than it needs to be in some circumstances. You answered my questions about slow streets. Thank you. And the last was kind of fits into traffic, but also kind of public works, is the landscaping around the city entrance sign as you come off the 110 freeway. We understood that once we got the West Coast Arborist contract in place, that they were going to take care of the trimming and the maintenance for that, because kind of a waste. We've got it illuminated and you can't even see it. And there is one of those gateway positions that really kind of showcases the city as you come off the Orange Grove off-ramp, and yet you don't see anything right now. And it's really overgrown, and it just doesn't project the right image that we should be projecting to the public. So I just wanted to earmark that out and call that out again. But again, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I think Mr. Gerber's received an earful about that City of South Pasadena signage. I know is one of the first things I mentioned to him when he reached out to me. But it sounds like we're close to getting something done. Yeah, he's nodding his head. but stay seated. You don't need to. So I want to thank Mr. Gerber as well. I agree with all the comments. I've only been working with you, was it a week or two at most? And it's been a pleasure. You're dedicated and interested in the fact that you dove right in and you got up to speed really fast on a lot of different aspects of just what we do. Forget about the rest of Public Works is very impressive, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for that. And Tatovic is, always amazing, as is Liana. So we thank all of you for supporting us. I'm just going to mention two quick things. Within the last month, through the Chamber of Commerce grocery outlet reached out to me expressing concern about the fact that they have difficulty with folks getting access to their business due to the U-turn restriction for westbound Huntington at Fremont, and then a left turn restriction from southbound Fremont into their property. So people coming from a couple of different directions, it's difficult, especially from the east. I went out there a couple of weeks ago, if not more, spoke with the owner, looked at it. It looks like there's an opportunity on the Fremont side. The U-turn restriction is there because there's a green arrow for northbound Fremont onto eastbound Huntington. So that makes sense. I said, there probably isn't much we can do with that, but the left turn restriction into the parking lot south of Huntington, it looks like there's an opportunity for some striping modifications to create a two-way turn lane so that there can be a safe harbor for people turning in, which would then justify removal of the left turn restriction, which is there to prevent backup of traffic. So I shared it with Ghassan a couple of weeks ago, and I think he was looking into it. So hopefully we can get a solution that's workable for them. Second, homeowners on, let's see, in the Altos, it's the Altos de Monterey Homeowners Association sent an email to it's PW service request email. Does that sound right? And then they copied me asking for some pavement markings and striping refresh on Via Del Rey at 3 locations, which apparently was worn down during some construction at the school. So I'm sure that's in the queue, but if you could just sort of keep that in mind and see if there's something that can be done, that would be fantastic. Other than that, I think tomorrow night, amongst other things, the council is talking about redistricting, or that conversation is starting publicly. So that might be of interest to folks. And I think that's all I have. So without anything further, we do have one other item, but we maybe have already covered it. And that is number 10, staff liaison communications. Is there anything further?
So we'll make this quick as not to keep you any longer. So we did meet with West Coast Arborists for our contract kickoff yesterday. And so though we won't resume our routine tree trimming probably for a few weeks, we are getting a quote for them to address the stone sign. The rock sign. And our parks and tree supervisor is working to get the Caltrans permission in order for West Coast Arborists to trim that as soon as possible.
Great, thank you.
There was a couple other items mentioned. So Ghassan and I did take a look at that Huntington Fremont intersection. We did have a concern with allowing a left turn off of Huntington northbound into Fremont for a two-way lane, given the amount of traffic coming south on Fremont turning right into Huntington. We also noted that there was a triangle median on the west side that sort of restricted movement into the grocery outlet complex from both the north turning right into the complex and then out of the parking lot going south. But we'll take a look at it. I'd say in the immediacy, the staff was planning on putting a U-turn sign over at Huntington and Maple to allow cars to not U-turn at Fremont Huntington, but to drive further east and U-turn and come back to grocery outlet. There was a miscommunication and it became a no U-turn sign. And at the moment there's no sign there. So we're planning on putting a a U-turn sign at,
I think that one is
That's
removed.
Huntington, Maple.
Because I
Okay.
brought it up with,
Okay.
with Gassan, because when they turned on that overlap, it removed that U-turn and you had to go all the way down to Alhambra Road.
right,
So
right.
now you can U-turn at Maple.
Maple,
It's still a
yes.
little inconvenient, but
It is,
at least
um,
it's not as bad as going all the way down to.
But we are
Alhambra
taking a
Road.
look at that Fremont Huntington intersection, and there is that conflict, as you mentioned, as a right turn from Fremont south, heading west to Huntington, and then the U-turn at Fremont Huntington. So yeah, we'll come back with some more information on that item.
Okay, maybe I'll follow up with you separately.
Sure, that's fine. As far as the gold line items, we do have Commissioner Fisher's 5 objectives. We had a brief conversation about it tonight or this afternoon. We haven't made any progress on that, but understanding your concern and in terms of looking at that $80,000 to see if there's any work that can be done, we've got that on our list. There's a couple other items from our previous meeting that you asked for updates on. I think we covered the corridor project information during our earlier discussion. We'll have to get back to you on, there was a comment about adding Arroyo Drive as a complete street, so we'll have to get back to you on that item. And then as far as the Meridian form for collecting collision data from residents that may not have necessarily been reported to the police department, we forwarded that form on to the city attorney, the police chief, and the fire chief, and we'll have a discussion with them and bring back more information for you on that.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate the follow-up. That's terrific. Okay, great. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda, excuse me. So unless there's an objection, I'll call this meeting adjourned. Right? Thank you all very much.
Everyone
Have
have
a
a good Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's right. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.